The agenda is fairly straightforward. We should be done in less than an hour. Should I start? All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the SCIM Working Group. All right. So, do we have any newcomers who are attending here for the first time? So, I won't read the whole note well, but this is your. Okay, great. Good. Because I figure by Wednesday, everybody should be familiar. So just note the note well and the note really well, which talks about the code of conduct. Just, we're pretty much a friendly group here. So I don't think we need to do any strong reminders. Um, okay. So for those that are remote, again, I think most of you are not new to this, but the tips and tricks for how to come in and off if you need to get on the queue with respect to audio and video, those that are remote as well as in person. The reminders are there. So thank you, Justin and Brent, for being our note takers. Note that this session is being recorded. The materials are all downloaded in the data tracker, and we can start with our agenda bash. Um, So just really quick, thanks to our esteemed AD, we are moving forward with the cursor pagination. There's a little bit of feedback that's going back and forth. I'm in the process of working with the authors since I will be the shepherd for the device model draft. So that will be coming next. And Aaron is shepherding the SCIM events draft. So that's the quick intro and update. Next up, we've got a draft now for the use cases. And so I think Paulo will be giving us an update on that. And then, as I think sort of a liaison in the OpenID Foundation, there is a new working group called IPSI. I'll let Aaron explain all of that. He'll provide an update on what the OpenID Foundation is doing and the interconnect with SCIM there as well. So any comments, feedback on the agenda? Going once, twice? All right. Yes, and I will call them out when we start. So if we're ready to start, yes, please go to the mic.
Hi, Dean Sachs. Have we seen any updates on the Delta queries work, or has that?
I don't even think it's an adopted document.
Okay.
So if you want to, then we can discuss it on the mail list.
Okay, that's great. I just need to know if there had been any updates or anything
There's
there.
been no updates, no movement, no discussion.
Okay,
so.
Great. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Any other? Okay. So we will have Paulo Correia give us the update on the SCIM use cases. Paulo, do you want to share your own slides? You want me to?
No, I think you can share.
Okay.
Okay, and I saw that we have a clicker now. So you can hear me well, right?
Yes. But
Okay,
I don't know if
okay.
I can give him the clicker remote.
No, we have a bot that does the clicker. That is something new. So that's nice. Okay, so let's try it.
You beat me to it. You have
Okay,
the
so let's
clicker.
go. Yes, good. So we submit me and Pam, we submit the draft, and it was approved by the group in the last IETF. Now what we really need is feedback from everyone, right? So I think that Elliot read it. At least we had some feedback in the last IETF meeting, but we are lacking more people to provide feedback. Okay, and Aaron asks us to create a little bit of overview what we are going to have it in the draft, and that's what this session is all about. I will not bother you with all the details on the content because we did that in the last couple of IETF meetings. We are just talking about structure and what we are covering in here. Okay, so 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 why do we need this? So clearly, and this happened to me and to Pam a couple of IETF back. I don't know, like 5 or 6 IETFs back, that we were in a side meeting, and I remember that Dean was there, Aaron was there, and it was really funny because everyone was trying to say the same thing, but everyone was using different terms to describe what we were talking about. And it was really confusing. At some point, we were discussing more the terms than what we want to talk about. So at that point, it was clearly that the RFC that talks about scheme and that introduces the concept did not give us the right tools for us to have a conversation and to educate the people that are going to adopt and are going to implement. So the idea of this document was mainly, so first, to have the right terminology so that whenever we are in a meeting, everyone is talking about same thing. At the same point, giving 2 types of use cases. So the general use cases that are not specific on any implementation, that we call it generic use cases, and we are going to detail a little bit more. And then a very specialized use cases, like the one that we are discussing on reconciliation, on devices. So there are very specific ones that we see scheme being used, and that is the part. By no way we plan to be exhaustive in the use case, but we need to give a good idea to the implementers on when they discuss what are the terms, and then after that, understanding what are the use cases that are already been done there, so that when they jump to the RFCs with the details, they understand clearly what is been happening there. So if this is at some point comes to life, this draft, I think that then we need to review the other two to make sure that they have the right kind of concept that we agree in this document, right? So the aim, again, it's to describe each one of the elements when we are talking about scheme and what is the flow, and then bring the use cases. So now, what are the terminologies that we introduce, and we try to get the right terms so that we, all of us, can talk about the same thing when we describe schemes. So we start with the data models, and we talk about what is a resource object and what are the attributes of the resource object. We try to identify those 2 concepts. And again, it's not about users any longer, right? Because we have devices, we have users, we have groups, we have many different things. So we start to call it resources, right? Then we talk a little bit about the protocol. There isn't much to say, but I think this is the only part that everyone agrees, right? I think from a term perspective, we have a scheme server and we have a scheme client, and then we try to go on the orchestration role. So to achieve scheme, we always have a specific role that is going to do specific things. Things like creating a resource or updating a resource or manage the resource, receiving resources and pushing it to resource subscribers, or external resource creators, someone that creates resources, but it's not using that scheme protocol. Then, after defining what are these different resources, these different roles that we have in the scheme, then we define how do we start the action, right? So what are the triggers for starting a scheme interaction? We talk about periodical intervals, events, application triggers, or even things like single sign-on protocols that can trigger a scheme action. And then we go through the actions, right? So we have the active push, right? And we try to define the terms because from an action perspective, this was not very clear. So we call it active push, active pull, active delta queries, domain replication mode, and coordinated and provision. So then we go to the use case. So this first part is like giving the weapons to everyone to have the right terms so that when we have a conversation, all of us are talking about the same things, right? So when we develop a new draft or anything like that, we use the right terms so that everyone is in the same page. Then after that, the second part of the document, it's about the use cases itself, right? We always call it use case, but I think this document is a little bit more than just use cases. So then in the use cases, we started with the basic ones, right? That are very agnostic, that will fit any of the flows that we see today, right? So first, it's subscribing to a resource. So there is someone that needs to get information about a specific resource, right? Then the second use case is that the creator. So there is someone that is going to create a resource somewhere. And the final one is about resource manager. Normally the IDMs that have someone that can create the resource there, or they can create themselves, and then they are going to push it to a specific subscriber. And these are very generic. We give some examples of where you see that thing like this is a SaaS application, or this is an IDM, or something like that, right? Just giving generic ones. Where we go more specific, and this is my last slide, I think I'm still on time, it's about the specific implementations. So I worked a little bit with Elliot because he was the first one to provide feedback. That's why you see 4 use cases from devices. But again, we can extend that with more, right? So the use case that we have right now is partner device registration, and this is an ongoing draft that is being approved by the group, where you have a device provider that is going to push the information about the device that they sell to a specific customer to that customer, and that is the first one. The other one is device creation. So you have a specific device, an IoT device that needs to be created in a device manager using a commissioning tool. The other one is any client app that needs to have access to directory services. So services about directories, so the other device that exists in the organization, a bunch of numbers for doing dialing, whatever. The other one is other devices use cases that we also discuss that might be interesting in the future to have other drafts that is covered there. Then we have a use cases on a simple app. So inside an organization, we might have a light version of SCIM where, for instance, a client doesn't have updates or anything. It's just an action that is done using the SCIM protocol, but without having the full elements from a server and from a client perspective. Then the next use case is when you have a SaaS app that SaaS app is normally a subscriber, right? Like any applications that we have in the market that, like a collaboration application like WebEx, just to give the example, that is just subscribing information from a specific identity manager, but there is an attribute for the users that is created by that server, right? So at that point is the owner of the creation of that service. And that is RAs, the resource attributes authority, resides in the SaaS app. The other one that is a little bit based on what Dean said, that was the draft that we had for the Delta query. The Delta queries was to address the use cases of reconciliation, right? When you push the information about attributes to a specific server, and then that specific server, or maybe that was not Delta query, that was the other one from Agile. The delta queries, yes, the delta queries. That the server is going to say, okay, so this is the different attributes that we are not receiving correctly. And the final one will be the HR application, where you have an application that is not an IDM, but is going to be in charge of creating a resource object and a couple of attributes of that object. Okay, and this is the use case that we cover in here. We can have more, but this was the ones that we discuss in different IETF meetings, and we try to brought it in here. And that's it.
Okay, thanks, Paulo. So you said you needed more reviews, so we can
Yes.
ask. Is anybody both remote or here? So Dean just raised his hand. It'd be good if we can get at least one or two more volunteers to review the draft. Let's see who I can pick on. Go ahead.
I see Harvey and Anjali are in the queue. Do you want to feel free to just come off mute if you want to say something?
Oh, I was just asking for the slide so that I can read it offline. Sorry.
Oh, you can. Yeah, sorry. The slides are available in a link in Data Tracker. The Ask Slides button is to ask to present slides in this meeting.
Got it. Sorry.
Meeting materials is what it's called in Data Tracker. Thanks, Justin. And Anjali in chat has volunteered to review. Thank you, Anjali.
All right. So I think up next year. Thank you, Paulo. So you've got a couple people that have volunteered to review the draft. Okay, so up next is Aaron Parecki to go through. Who's going to win? Who's going to win? I know it says all the slots have all. That's not what I did before. How do I unshare? Unshare. Okay. It was interesting when I swept between the chairs and the. Okay, there we go. And you took the clicker. Okay.
Taking my chair hat off, so I'm coming up to this microphone so that it's clear. Hi, Aaron Parecki. So I've actually got some of my colleagues here on the remotely who are the. I'm also presenting this in the, on their behalf. This is some updates to SCIM roles and entitlements. So for context, the roles and entitlements draft has been adopted by the working group a while ago, actually. I think it was in the end of 2022, and hasn't had much activity since then. But it's out there and it's adopted, and turns out is being used. So I wanted to first give a quick description of what this draft actually does. The core schema, SCIM schema, defines roles and entitlements attributes on user objects so that the identity provider can communicate to SCIM servers these attributes, entitlements, and roles. However, that's pretty much where SCIM leaves the discussion of roles and entitlements until this draft. So this draft was adopted and last updated in December 2022. This is a way, this kind of is the other half of the picture. This draft enables the SCIM server, which in some cases would be the SaaS application, to actually make its roles and entitlements available to be managed by the IDP or the SCIM client. Then allowing the IDP to communicate those back to the SCIM server, closing that loop. So it's completing the picture of what was only half described in the SCIM core vocabulary. So this has been out there. Okta has actually now implemented this draft, and in doing so, has discovered a couple of things that need some slight tweaks to make it actually work well. So we wanted to propose these changes to this draft to actually as a complete working system. A couple of things to define are the root schema definitions for a role and an entitlement, an ID attribute on the actual roles and entitlements objects that get synced back and forth, and then the ability for the service provider to define their own extensions and namespace for these roles and entitlements. This is the summary of essentially the changes that were needed to actually make this work in an implementation. These are currently sitting in a pull request on the GitHub repo. It is not an update to the draft yet, but I'm hoping that we can agree that this is an update that makes sense. The only other thing here is an example of what this actually looks like. So this is what an entitlement now looks like with the changes. So you'll see there's the ID, so that it has a stable identifier that can be used to, instead of having to string match on names or other things like that. And I think that there was a minor attribute change in the list of attributes there as well, but it's also sitting in that PR. Yeah, so I'm excited that we can actually get some movement on this draft again. It is an adopted draft, but Danny, the original author, decided to not pursue it farther after that, and we've got a couple of folks at Okta who are willing to step in and help actually move this draft forward and work on finishing it. So if you have any questions about this, happy to answer questions. We have my colleagues are on the line as well. If there's any more of the technical questions about the implementation as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, has anybody even reviewed the draft, given that it's been so long?
Yeah.
So it will be good for you to make the updates, put another rev, and then post to the mail list, solicit feedback.
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
Yep.
And yeah, Danny has said that he's willing to have the others join as authors on the draft, so we'll do all that at once. Yep.
Great. All right. So that's it for this one?
That's it for this one. Unless there's any other thoughts or comments, questions.
Any other comments before we move to the IPSI update from the OpenID Foundation? All right.
Great. Now let me get my other hat. All right. Do I still have this clicker?
Oh, do I need to give it back to
I'm
you?
not actually sure if you. Cool. Yes. Okay. Hi, Aaron Parecki again. This time coming to you from the OpenID Foundation. So the IPSI working group is a new working group in the OpenID Foundation focused on enterprise identity problems. This is, as you might imagine, relevant to SCIM, as SCIM is also often used in enterprise identity. So I wanted to give some context about what the group is working on, the goals of the group, progress that's been made so far, and kind of connect this bridge here to the working group at the IETF. Some background on the sort of problem space that the working group is tackling. Two main themes: interoperability and security. So interoperability, in that there are many standards in the enterprise world that are sometimes even competing with each other. OpenID and SAML, for example. Even when there is only one standard in use, the standard is often very flexible. So think of how you can bend OAuth in many interesting and creative ways. And as well, OpenID Connect. Many parts of the specs are optional. You can choose to customize things and add your own extension points and get very creative. What this ends up meaning in practice is that a lot of times you will end up with enterprise identity providers that have gone and done some of these custom things or only implemented parts of the specs that were optional, and people have made different decisions about which of the optional aspects to implement, which results in a very high cost of developing against these implementations because you have to go and read the vendor's specific documentation rather than following the standard. On the security side, again, because these standards are so flexible, there's often insecure configurations of them, insecure uses of them, for better or for worse. Sometimes those are okay given a certain threat model, and sometimes they're not okay. But beyond that, there's just a lot of things are changing now in the world, and there are a lot of new threats coming, and there are a lot of new solutions needed to solve those. We got very far in fighting a lot of these threats with single sign-on alone, and we've now passed that, we've crossed that bridge, and that is no longer enough to combat the modern threat landscape in enterprise identity. In other words, password hacking is like raw password attacks are not the place people are breaking in the front door anymore. People are going in through very creative ways that need a lot of new creative solutions. So that is kind of the problem space that the IPSI working group is working in. The scope of the charter of the Open Identity Foundation working group is these elements addressing single sign-on, entitlements, lifecycle management, risk signal sharing, session termination, token revocation. Some of these are not related to SCIM at all. Some of these are very closely related to SCIM, as I, in fact, just mentioned the roles and entitlements draft. The goal of the working group is not to create new specs. The goal is to profile existing specs as much as possible. In other words, there's a lot of great work out there. There's a lot of existing things that are deployed and working fine. The goal is to reduce the options available and remove the insecure options, choose the secure defaults, make it more interoperable, reduce the ambiguity, make it so that implementers can actually follow the specs rather than follow vendors' documentation. So this brings me to how this relates to SCIM. This is a snapshot of the working group's sort of first, I don't want to say deliverable, but it's the first like written output of the working group. There's not yet an actual spec draft adopted yet by the working group. So far, the working group has been working on kind of describing the goals of what the contents of the draft should say. And we've arrived on this idea of levels within the IPSI working group that describe two main tracks. One is the session lifecycle, that's the SL section on the top, and the bottom half is the identity lifecycle, levels 1, 2, and 3 within those. Essentially, each level will give each party involved in the spec a new capabilities that they don't have at previous levels. So as far as SCIM is concerned, you can pretty much ignore the top half of this draft of this chart because that's talking about logging in and logging out. That's the interactive part of a user session, talking about how they get in, how session is managed and terminated. But the identity lifecycle part on the bottom is where we see a lot of similar use cases that SCIM solves. So provisioning users, creating, updating, deleting, deprovisioning. We see groups, we see application roles and capabilities. So that's where we start to see a lot of the overlap with the drafts that the SCIM working group has published. So, and this is where I really wanted to connect these dots. What I really don't want to see is I do not want to see the OpenID IPSI working group go off and do its own thing and invent a bunch of stuff for profile SCIM on its own little island. I really want to make sure that anything that working group is doing is also doing it in conjunction with the SCIM working group itself. We're not trying to go off on our own and go and create new things there. Really want to make sure that this is done in conjunction with the core SCIM working group. So the this table is describing the goals that each level will solve. The next step of the working group is to describe how those goals are solved with a spec. So SCIM is one spec that we can use to achieve these goals. You could imagine that you could just invent some other spec to achieve these goals as well. You could get creative about how you might use OpenID Connect itself to solve these goals, but we're trying to reuse as much of the existing infrastructure that people have deployed as possible. So the very specific ask that I would have is, for those of you who have deployed SCIM clients and servers, as you look through these goals, how would you take your SCIM implementation and tune it to achieve these, while also keeping in mind the other goal of this, which is security as and interoperability, meaning removing things that are not necessary or removing the sort of insecure options, choosing strong authentication methods where of the services to each other. All of those kinds of things are the things that we need to now tackle in the IPSI working group to actually create that document that describes how it works. So SCIM, for example, does not describe how the client authenticates to the server. And that is, there's reasons why it doesn't specify that. That has allowed things to be more flexible and in the deployments, but at the end of the day, someone needs to authenticate that client to the server, and that needs to be written down somewhere. So that is the thought here is that that would be written down in the IPSI profile of SCIM that achieves these goals. The other thing I want to call out is the goals that the working group has now been discussing and committed to.
You mean 25?
Yes, I mean 25.
We're really late. It's September 24.
So there's an event, the Gartner IAM Summit in December 2025, which time travel is hard. We're all just going through it at different speeds. So 2025, at the end of the year, some of us live in the past, yes. At the end of 2025, there is an event, Gartner IAM Summit, and the OpenID Foundation, a couple different working groups in the OpenID Foundation have been using these events as an opportunity to hold interop events to demonstrate interoperability of various OpenID specifications. So we intend to also participate and host an interop event for the IPSI working group with ideally demonstrating interop on the first level of both the session lifecycle track and identity lifecycle track. Essentially what that would mean is we'll need to have a draft done before then, let's say around September, giving people a few months to prep for the event. So that is now only about 6 months away. So we've got 6 months to actually write that first draft of what does it actually look like to use SCIM to achieve the level 1 of what the goals that IPSI has set out for. So yeah, that is the state of the working group. Happy to answer any questions and have a discussion here.
Any comments or questions to the work? All right, Dean's in the queue.
Hi, Dean Sachs again. So I actually co-chair this with Aaron and OpenID Foundation. Would love to see some of the folks in this room join us to help us with the work toward the IL1 profile this year. It would be super helpful to get folks involved who are actively deploying SCIM today, who have thoughts and feelings about SCIM, and can really help us start to solve some of the problems around how do we define how a SCIM client and server authenticate to each other, right? This is a very open-ended thing right now. I certainly dealt with this during my time at my last employer, and I know others have dealt with it as well. So it'd be great to get some movement on that. So just encouraging people to come and join us and help out, and whether some of the work gets defined here, some of the work gets defined in OpenID, kind of up in the air right now, but I would ideally love to see most of the SCIM-oriented work get defined here, so that we can use it within OpenID Foundation, within IPSI, as opposed to having to create a new independent work stream within IPSI, because that would just that would create complications that are unnecessary.
Okay, so as SCIM chair, knowing the OpenID rules, I think the thing that would help us is if we could have in the SCIM mail list the sharing of the documents. And the reason why I'm saying this is there's some IPR things. So it's something that we would have to take to the OpenID board to get clearance so that that document could be shared before it's, because I don't think those documents are fully open, available
Which
to everybody.
documents?
The
Yeah.
documents, you're going to
This
write
is all
specifications.
so this is all on GitHub. It's all public,
Okay.
and
Oh.
this is the only document so far.
That's right.
Okay, so as long as that's public, my suggestion is put this on the mail list. The IETF has hackathons, so you could host a hackathon in the July venue. My other suggestion would be host a joint side meeting. We could ask to have an IETF SCIM interim, so that we could get the liaison between the participants in IPSI and the participants in SCIM to go through and get direct live review that way. But I
That's-
would say for the questions that you've asked, Aaron, and Dean, right? How do people use SCIM with the login events and, the updates and all of that? You can start posting all of those questions on the mail list.
Okay.
Right.
Yep, we can do that.
Yep.
Just as a point of order, would it be easier for me to do that interaction from my seat in the OpenID Foundation on the SCIM mailing list because of Aaron being chair of the group?
That's probably the
Okay.
better way to do it.
Okay,
Yep.
I can take that on. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, just also one thing to clarify about what Dean said at the end there. The IPSI working group is explicitly focused on enterprise use cases, and there's a lot of use cases of SCIM that are not enterprise focused. So the way that I've been seeing this kind of play out is when there is a need when we need to describe something in a spec that is only relevant to enterprise use cases, that might make more sense to do it in the OpenID working group itself. But if that thing that we're defining in a spec, whether it's defining how client authentication works, or we need a new object type or a new vocabulary thing, like the entitlements, for example, if it applies to more than the enterprise use case, it should absolutely be done in the SCIM working group of the IETF, not done in the OpenID Foundation. I want to avoid having the OpenID Foundation in creating the new things in that bubble.
I was going to say we need to ensure that the OpenID, that IPSI focuses on the profile at
Yes,
SCIM as
yes.
opposed to defining the extensions, because the extensions should be here in SCIM.
Absolutely.
Right. So I think we're on the same page. Are you on the queue? Can you state your name?
Ali Hussain. I have some doubt to clarify. So when we talk about enterprise, is this also cover the academic institutes, like NRNs are doing kind of identity work a lot? So they have the Federation of Academic Institutes like IDIROM.
Yeah, we've spent a while wordsmithing a definition of enterprise that covers the intended scope of this, which I probably actually should have put in this slide deck. But it is on the GitHub repo. But it is meant to, it's not limited. Dean, do you have a better description of this so I don't stumble over my words?
I do. Dean Sachs again. The way that we defined enterprise, because we too were stumbling on our words on this, and enterprise is a very loaded term, is if you consider yourself an enterprise, you are an enterprise. And so you could be a small business, you can be a large cloud hyperscaler, you can be everything in between, you can be in education. all of those are different kinds of enterprises. Even government could be considered an enterprise. So it is up to you if you define yourself within that terminology.
And I think the one more concrete aspect of that is if you want to control your overall application usage from a single control point, then that's kind of the more concrete definition of that.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter how big you are or what the structure is or what tools you're using or whether there's multiple tools you use to control your whole world of applications. But the idea is that if you have a collection of applications and you manage those through some, you've got single sign-on configured, you're trying to manage them through a single point, then you're probably in the scope of this.
And I will say, I think I heard you mention EduRoam. We do have folks who have been involved in IPSI to date who do work in that EduRoam Internet 2 space. The large scale federations like RefEds and such. We have had some of those folks involved already. So you do see some of that intersection with the work happening in IPSI right now.
I just want to pause because for the note taker, we did not capture your name. So do you mind just giving Brent your name?
This is Ali Hussain.
Did you catch that? Still no. Can you just?
Ali, ALI, HUSSAIN, Hussain.
All right. Transcript. Woot. Yeah. This is good. So I would just say if you have updates, you're going to post a list of questions, right, of the things you're trying to, but as you have updates and availability for the spec that's on it'd be useful because I'm looking at the participants, some are not in the OpenID Foundation. It'd be good for you to just post on the mail list, hey, there's been an update, you might go look at the GitHub.
Got it. And I will hold on to that responsibility for the IPSI working group to make sure we keep things super clear.
Appreciate it, Dean.
No problem.
Great. This is good. Any other comments, questions, feedback? All right, Justin.
Justin Richer, and I'm sure Mike Jones would especially know this. Do we have a formal liaison relationship between OIDF and IETF set up, or is it just we're all the same people? Okay, the answer is no.
More of the latter.
Yep. Okay,
Correct.
That's fine. I was just checking. I know we do with W3C and some other groups.
Correct.
So, okay, thanks.
I guess my next question would be, is that acceptable? Is that okay? Yeah, okay.
I mean, it's pretty much the same people, especially for the enterprise side. So if it doesn't, then I would look to our esteemed AD and say, yeah.
So just as an example of another one, the relationship that we have with CNCF is also informal, even though there's a lot of spiffy people in Whimsy and Whimsy people bringing stuff to Spiffy and whatnot. I just wanted to clarify for the notes, and since this is being set up to be a little bit more deliberate, whether it was formal or informal. So thanks.
Informally deliberate. How about that?
Informally deliberate is absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nancy.
Okay.
So, Mike Jones, I will say something that many of you in the room already know, that there is a very long history of cooperation between work in the OpenID Foundation and the IETF. In particular, there's a whole bunch of overlap between work in OAuth, work in Jose, et cetera, that's been a productive collaboration. And it happens in part because the same people go to the overlap and carry it forward in a collaborative, deliberate fashion.
Yeah, I don't see a need for formality in this case, especially because we're trying to move back in time. Sorry, just poking fun. All right.
Great.
If there are no other comments, I will put the question if there's any other business. Going once, going twice. I think we are done. Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned. So more on the mail list. You know, even if you wait a week, because most of the people are here, they're probably not going to pay attention until next week. But yeah, so well, so all I'm trying to say is just make sure you have a cadence to build that momentum, right? Yeah. Smooth. Smooth. Thank you. I think I have Robin Monteros from the Cisco side in the IPSI group. So, Luna. No, no.